What does a box of film, old school cameras, color filters, and today's digital cameras have in common? That even when you're shooting for black and white, these two colors really matter. Last week, I did a pretty popular video talking about drop color, essentially explaining why digital often gets this ugly, overcooked look and taking a few lessons from film on how to quickly solve it on any of your photos. But today, we're going to look at something a little different, and that is taking the concept of drop color and looking at how to make all your black and white photos better really fast. To do this today, I'm going to edit 3 photos. All of them are pretty good exposures, and all of them need to be converted to black and white. Now, if you've done digital photography for any time at all, you know that just desaturating a photo doesn't give you a great black and white. Now, the reason for that is actually the way the colors are mixed. In the film days, of course, we had green and yellow and orange filters, etc., to give us the right mix of color and how those colors responded to black and white film. Notice how even on digital, my tone, it affected a great deal. So those same channels affect our black and white. But there is a twist in black and white, and I will show you that at the end of the video. Now, I'm here in Lightroom, but this applies to Capture One, On One, Photo Raw, you name it, because as I mentioned in last week's video, these mixers for color channels are mostly the same across all RAW editors. If I switch this to a black and white mode, you can see that instead of the normal HSL sliders, I really just have these color sliders. But these are very, very important. As always, I will always be using presets, actions, etc. That's what pros do, so we can get the best variety in our photos and the best edits. But whether you're making your own or whether you're one of my users that uses my silver pack or something like that, I've been refining the recipes in that pack for 15 years. That's why it's the best black and white preset pack. I also do this with actions and Photoshop using tools like Lightroom and emulsion. But there's a really important thing to understand. If I take this portrait and I start browsing through presets, one of the biggest powers is just being able to see different edits. Notice how this is really crisp and a little over the top. This is kind of in the middle. Silver skin here, I'm in silver 5 by the way, is a lot softer. Before we get into the color channels, it's important to understand that all these sliders we're always pushing, if you actually dig into clarity versus contrast, they're both contrast. I've talked about this in different videos. Just the radius of the amount of pixels they're affecting is wider or narrower, which gives a different result. But effectively, all these sliders, whether they're color or otherwise, we're just adjusting the gain of something. Why is that important? Let's reset this photo again, and let me go to something that's a little bit intense, like Portrait Crush, okay? What this does is a magical drop-off curve that's very easy. You can see how I've done this curve, and it lets the highlights drop off. Now, this was a pretty bright photo, and you see that it's a little bit hot. This curve is brightening up the photo quite a bit. But I don't want to take away that curve, so I'm going to compensate. Notice what I'm doing here is while the curve brightens the skin tones, I then darken the rest of the photo and I create this really rich, smooth skin tone contrast. This isn't always the look you want, but this can be a gorgeous look. Let's go down to the black and white. If you saw my drop color video, you know that we manipulated greens and orange by pulling down greens and pushing up oranges. There was a little more to it in color, but it's actually very simple in black and white. Notice how oranges, which usually reflect the skin tones, dramatically changes the intensity. It's important to understand, though, that as you do this, you're also interacting with the curve. So if a curve is dropping off at certain lightness levels, when you adjust the brightness levels of, let's say, the oranges, what you get is a very unique mix, because as you adjust this slider, it's also affected by the rest of the settings in your photo. But if you look here, we're actually doing drop color. We're pushing oranges a little bit and we're pulling greens. Look what happens to the scene if I pull the greens, how I can easily create separation between the subject and the background. This doesn't just work in portraits. Separating colors allows us to separate tones and create a 3-dimensional depth. This is stuff I talk about a lot in my Shadow Hackers live workshops, I'll put a link to those in the comments if you've never been. If I take this street scene of this beetle and I go to silver again, let's do something like a film-inspired look. Now, again, we're seeing that same thing. Notice here how we have the greens pulled down and the oranges pushed up. Now, you can decide how far, but notice how these color channels affect everything really distinctly. I will intentionally choose a recipe that brightens up my subject and then pull the exposure down just a little bit. And what it does is it darkens everything proportionally, making my subject stand out even more. The bottom line here is that the drop color method, where we pull greens and push oranges, even though you don't have the hue, saturation, and luminance value, you essentially just have the luminance value, but there's something in black and white that can be a little bit different. And that is sometimes you want to reverse and lift the greens. If you take this here, it feels a little bit underexposed, but actually I was just preserving dynamic range. And then to get the right mix, I'm going to browse through and just kind of find the look of the preset that works good. I'm going to go with Jungle River because I kind of want that pop clarity feel. If we go down to the channels on this one, we see that the oranges are lifted and the greens are lifted. Why is this? Because look at how it's affecting the foliage. There's nothing wrong with going a darker green on this. It still looks good. But in some cases, I find that pushing the greens up actually is a benefit. Now, of course, in a color image, pushing the saturation of the greens is rarely something you would want to do because digital overdrives the greens. Sometimes I will push the luminance of the greens in a color, but in black and white, I'll do it a lot more because a lot of times you're separating rich blacks and shadows from foliage, water, etc., or skin tones, let's say. If I move the orange channel up and down, you can see it does affect kind of the overall contrast and the mix, but the green channel is directly affecting that foliage. And as I push up the green channel, I'm almost getting an infrared sort of look. Now, you could replicate this in your own way very easily if you want to make your own presets, but we have a nice kind of F curve here, which I talk about on the channel, gives us nice filmic highlights, and we're just pushing those greens up a little higher and then mixing the other colors as needed, combining that for this really rich, detailed, contrasty black and white that still has detail all the way down to the shadows, and it's using the entire tonal range. So whether it's a portrait, a street scene, a black and white landscape, it doesn't actually matter. The channels of drop color, the manipulation of how we use green and orange are very important, just like they were on film. And you can use those luminance values, much like exposure, to make your black and whites absolutely gorgeous. And if by doing so, you push your exposure, your skin tones, etc., a little too far, don't be afraid to then go back up and drop the overall exposure just a little bit to balance it out. It's a technique that works almost every time. A boring black and white from something that is gorgeous, contrasty, rich, and of course, shadowy. The reason these apps have presets, action styles, is because it's what you need to be consistent once you find a great mix. Whatever you're shooting with, if you do nothing else after this video, go to the link in the description. I will send you to the free sampler pack of my silver presets. You don't have to buy anything. And there's going to be some great examples of these mixes that I've spent the past 15 years refining to get the absolute best black and white conversions. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more tips like this. Let me know what you think in the comments and how you're editing your black and white. And we will see you next time. Peace.